Hey guys, welcome to another review. So today we're going to be reviewing the book These Truths by Jill Lepore. In this book, Lepore takes us through a comprehensive history of America from the time of Columbus until the modern day. And when I say comprehensive, I really do mean comprehensive. At about 782 pages, this book is looking thicker than J-Lo and Shakira at the Super Bowl. One of the central themes of this book deals with the dissonance that exists between the values that we believe in the way that we actually act. These values can best be defined by the first line of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Or, as Joe Biden likes to put it,
we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Yet for most of America's history, we haven't exactly done a great job adhering to those values, whether it's been in our treatment of blacks, women, Native Americans, or pretty much any ethnic minority that's ever come to this country. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much a part of the American experience for every ethnic minority to come to this country, get treated like crap, assimilate, and then get to turn around and do it to the next wave of immigrants. And I think this book does a really good job exploring that contradiction that exists between America's supposed values and our actions. However, another benefit of this book is that it was a great refresher on most of American history. I haven't really studied American history since high school, so it was really good to relearn some of the things that I had forgotten since then. So for the rest of this video, I want to go over 3 interesting facts that I had learned from this book that I had previously not known from US history. The first interesting thing I learned about was the story of Harry Washington, who was George Washington's slave before the Revolutionary War. However, interestingly enough, during the Revolutionary War, Harry Washington fought on the side of the British. The reason for this was because the British had proclaimed that any American slave that fought on their behalf in the Revolutionary War would win their freedom. Even though the British lost the war, Harry was able to escape to Nova Scotia and actually earn his freedom. He later then migrated to Sierra Leone, where he actually fought in another revolution against the British, interestingly enough, because of the unfair taxation system. It's somewhat ironic to think that Harry and George, who were bound by the bonds of slavery, were so similar. Both of these men eventually led revolutions against the British because of an unfair taxation policy, and both these men fought in the American War for Independence for what they believed were their own individual freedoms, even though they were on opposite sides of it. The second interesting fact was the story behind Morse code. You may understand Morse code as a series of dots and dashes that was used to communicate before the telephone existed. However, Morse code, interestingly enough, has a much darker and stranger history to it. You see, the inventor of Morse code, Samuel B. Morse, was an extreme nativist who had hated the large influx of Catholic immigrants into the country in the 1840s. You see, he believed that there was some sort of large-scale Catholic conspiracy that would eventually take over the country, and he thought that Protestants needed some sort of ciphered language in order to communicate to each other during that time period. And thus he created Morse code. He eventually realized he could make a hell of a lot more money utilizing it in a telegraph system, so eventually he made it public. But it's crazy to think that between all those dots and dashes lay the foundation of an extreme hatred for Catholics. And the third interesting fact that I found in this book was the history of how corporations became people in America. In 2010, the Supreme Court ruled in the Citizens United case that corporations are people, and thus they have the right to spend infinite amounts of money that they want on political campaigns because that's protected under their freedom of speech. While many people think that this was a pretty big turning point in American history, it's actually indicative of a legal doctrine that has pretty much existed for well over 100 years. You see, in the 1880s, a corporate lawyer named Roscoe Conkling, who was representing the Southern Pacific Railroad Company, said that direct taxes on corporations are a violation of the 14th Amendment because corporations are people. For those of you who don't remember, the 14th Amendment was passed near the end of the Civil War and was basically intended to give equal protection to former slaves in the ways that laws are enforced. So at this point you might be asking, how did Conkling get away with this argument that corporations are people and have protection under the 14th Amendment? And it's actually pretty simple. You see, Conkling was actually a senator at the time that that amendment was being written. And he was the only surviving member of the Joint Committee that actually drafted the amendment. And he claimed that when the committee was drafting that amendment, they had intended for the word persons that's found in the 14th Amendment to be inclusive of corporations. Now, you'd think that the Supreme Court would have thrown out that argument given there was a pretty obvious conflict of interest, given at that time he was representing a corporation, but sadly that was not the case. And from that point forward, a legal precedent was set that corporations are people with the same constitutional rights. And ironically enough, more Supreme Court cases dealing with the 14th Amendment have dealt with the rights of corporations rather than the rights of actual people. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and I actually would highly recommend it. However, coming in at 800 pages, this book is pretty lengthy. So if you're not really into books that are that long, then I wouldn't recommend it for you. But I did feel like the writing was pretty good for this book and it flowed pretty nicely and it didn't feel too overwhelming. So guys, if you like this review, please like and subscribe and stay tuned next time for another review on beer, politics, and books.